We're
draft
drafting
season.
a main event team on FFPC, $2,000 entry team. Grand prize of $1 million.
I'm looking for that $1 million top prize.
Main event season is in full swing.
Tonight, we're diving deep into the NFC with one of the sharpest minds in fantasy football. Two-time FFPC main event champ, Abib Agbetoba. We're talking draft targets, hidden values, and Abib's hometown Texans. If you want an edge in your next big money draft, you're in the right place. Let's get.
District, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offer's the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man. Y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be trading. And I always be trading. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
What is up, Fantasyland? We have a monster show tonight. You guys know who this guy is. First, I got my boy Dan Williamson, one of the sharpest minds in the game, as you guys already know, as my co-host in the GOAT District. We're here talking high stakes, and no one is bigger in high stakes fantasy, in my mind, than the back-to-back champ, Abib Agbetoba. Buddy, welcome back to the District, man.
Oh man, thanks for having me back. It's been, like I said, been too long. It's been amazing seeing you guys kind of come back. I always love it when, the people that I listen to have a stake and have, some skin in the game. It just means a little bit more. So I love it all. I love it all.
We appreciate you joining us again. We appreciate what you and the boys are doing. The trio. I don't miss a show, man. First and 15 is one of my favorite shows. I feel like I'm hanging out with you guys in that basement or living room, wherever that thing is recorded, doing the drafts with you guys, talking high stakes. And what I love about you, man, is you not only won this thing once, you won it back to back, and you work harder, from what I could tell, or as hard as anyone in the game to win that thing again, man. You're not satisfied. You want to come back for a third trophy.
100%. And you mentioned the guys on the show, Chris, obviously sort of kind of on the ones and twos, everything behind the scenes, getting the pod going. And then Deo, honestly, probably those back-to-back victories are just as much him as it is me. It's, iron sharpens iron. I mean, the way he thinks and what he sort of kind of brings to the game from a mentality standpoint, it's almost like I don't feel like, it gets fully appreciated because he just has such a unique way of thinking things. And when you are unknowingly kind of get caught up in the Twitter cycle and the Twitter sphere and the groupthink, he's just that guy that literally pulls you out and is like, have you considered this? Or have you thought about this? Or there's this one random tight end that he's just super high on. So being able to kind of do the show with him, I feel like has just significantly made me a better player. And even those back-to-backs, I mean, even though we didn't have a show, we were always kind of going back and forth. You want to call them arguments, you want to call them discussions, but really they were just, us sort of kind of refining our process, testing out, where we were actually, who we're actually high on, was it real? Is it, or is it just, kind of following the hype? Did we really have a leg to stand on? So love those guys, and yeah, definitely it's fun doing that show on a weekly basis with them.
It's important, man. It's important. I think Dan and I, we truly believe, and you want to be surrounded by the best, and that's why we bring on the best to this show. I know I play with Dan because I think he's one of the best, and we own teams together, and we shoot trades off of each other, trade ideas or draft ideas. If we're stuck in a draft, I'll DM Dan. He's my go-to. I know you and Dale are like that. I love his devil's advocate approach, and especially his dynasty sleepers, man. I love those dynasty sleepers. And Dan, I know you respect Abib and the first and 15 guys, and I know you're pumped for this one as well, aren't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the best things about the show that you guys do is the fact that it is such real discussion. There's no fake, phony BS about it. I mean, you guys are talking football 100% in earnest, and the best thing is that everybody kind of puts their ego at the door. I think and it's not to say that you'll abandon a take lightly if you really believe in it, but also you're just willing to to hear all sides of any sort of situation and to take in new information and to allow it to color your process. And I think that's so key to doing well in fantasy is holding on to what you think is real, but also being willing to move off it if somebody can convince you that hey, there are things you haven't thought of. So love the dynamic there.
100%. And if you guys are tuning in for the first time, or you're back in the district on the regular, either way, we appreciate you guys. But you need to know that you're in the right place right now. You guys are going to get some serious nuggets. Grab that pen and paper if you're still doing that these days, or grab your phone, that little note app that you use for your fantasy football tips. Whether you're in high stakes or low stakes, man, it doesn't matter. You're going to get some serious nuggets to win your fantasy leagues this year and pump your NFL drafts. And let's start macro level, Abib. I know you're starting in those main event streets. You guys are doing some big gorillas. You're really putting in the volume. Like you said, man, we like in the district guys that walk the walk as well, and you definitely do that. Why don't you talk about some trends that maybe you're noticing, especially lately, as we're coming into the end of July here in the 2025 draft rooms that savvy drafters can capitalize on right now?
Whether you can capitalize on it or not is always the question, and we probably won't find that out until the end of the year. But definitely one thing that you're seeing, and you're probably seeing this in the best ball streets too as well, is running backs getting pushed up the board, especially in the earlier rounds. I think people really want and are gravitating to grabbing that workhorse back, the back that's going to get you a lot of touches. And early, drafting early in the off season. I mean, early, like February early. As soon as the gates opened, I was the first in line. But drafting early in the season, you were getting kind of Christian McCaffrey back into the second round, kind of like last year where Barkley was going at the beginning of the third. And you're just you're drafting. You're like, why is this guy being drafted so low? And then slowly you start to see these guys matriculate up the board. So understanding that is important. Just in from a standpoint of if you're doing a number of drafts and you want to have a certain type of build, or you want to go after a certain type of player. Maybe you want to go hero RB, or you want to go zero RB, or you want to go robust RB, or you want to be balanced. If you have the 11th slot, you need to kind of understand what type of running backs are going to make it back to you. And I think Fantasy Mojo is a great site, obviously, for that, to be able to sort of kind of go and look at draft boards. But man, they change rapidly. As soon as news drops, or as soon as the hype train starts to run on a certain player, you can automatically almost guarantee that guy is going to start going higher. And so, guy, if you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to go wide receiver, and then I'm going to be able to get me two running backs in the third and fourth round. Maybe you're going for Montgomery and Hampton, or even a Kenneth Walker these days. Hold your horses, because they may not make it back to you. I've been in a couple of drafts right now where these guys that were falling to me, really at the back end of the fourth round. Getting Alvin Kamara and Kenneth Walker in the fifth round. Now these guys are pretty much live in the third round. So it's kind of important to really understand the trends and the flows. Obviously, you got to Bruce Lee, be like water. Try not to necessarily have a plan, but some of us like to have fun with this. I like to experiment with zero RB builds, or maybe I want to go and be a bit balanced, or maybe I see an edge in the mid rounds. Probably the biggest trend that I've noticed is I don't want to call it depth, but the ADP tier of wide receivers that are in that, let's just call it back into the fourth to, the early seventh round. There's so many wide receivers that go in that round. And so, at times I'll play the ADP game and try to get greedy and try and stack guys that I really like. And then other times, I'll try to grab like 2 or 3 guys that I know would typically go in the 6th and 7th round just to make sure I can get them all on one team. So understanding, definitely those trends I think are really, really important. And then the last thing that I would, probably that I really note is, there's the elite quarterbacks and then there's the sort of kind of large, gap between that next tier, excluding like the Mahomes picture. So unless you just like have someone that you really love, or you maybe, I don't know, maybe you're going for a stack, for the most part, like you can wait and you can get ultra greedy. That's like a thing for me and us is like trying to be greedy as possible. But you can get really, really greedy as far as like letting somebody take a Bo Nix, letting somebody take a Kyler Murray, and then 2 rounds later, lo and behold, maybe you're at the back end and you can get both Dak and Justin Fields together. So I just love, especially this early on when things are still very much ambiguous, trying to really capitalize and get as many of these skills guys on my team as possible. Because then, you look back at the end of training camp or, after week 1 and you're asking yourself, how was I able to get this starting wide receiver who's like putting up top 15 wide receiver numbers in the 8th, 9th, 10th round? So that's a lot there, but yeah.
No, man, that's why we love bringing you on, because you got the goodness, and we want to hear every little intricacy, and that's where it shows that you're in the streets. You're passionate about it. You enjoy it. You like to play around with your builds, try different things. Now, are there any mistakes or traps that you see happening right now, maybe when you're watching other drafters in the draft rooms, or that you can see just based on these trends that we're seeing?
I don't want to call them traps because who knows? Like what I see as a trap is probably, might be the league winner. There's some things that I kind of noticed early on. And I guess, where you see the board sort of kind of going towards the back end of training camp into preseason, maybe kind of like the closest truth we get of like what the actual season will look like. There'll obviously be some misses in the ADP, but I think we probably get a little bit sharper as we get more information, as we see training camp plays out, as we see preseason starts. So, in answering your question, I'm basically going to, who are the biggest risers, or where are the biggest risers, where are the biggest falls? And I think where I'm seeing a lot of the ADP start to drop to kind of, coincide or to kind of equate to your, pitfalls would be some of just the handcuffs, the RB handcuffs. And I don't know if, there was optimism. Maybe the guy was going to be a 1B, or maybe he was going to potentially overtake the starter. But early in the draft season, I was just noticing a lot of these like high, let's call them high-end handcuff running backs were going very high. And a lot of guys who were starters were going after them. And I just never really truly understood that. And now you're starting to kind of see that shift and see those guys get pushed down. Like Trey Benson was going super early. Now you're starting to kind of see him fade away. Isaac Garendo was super high. Now you're starting to kind of see him fade away. And it's not that these guys can't be valuable and may not end up being a league winner, but even like a Zach Charbonnet at one point, I think was like, these guys are just going really, really high. And then you look further down the board and you're wondering like, well, this guy's still in an ambiguous situation. This wide receiver could literally be the wide receiver 1 on his team. And so I think now, as training camp is playing out, we're starting to see those guys shift. So the earliest pitfall to me was just, guys drafting handcuff RBs a little bit higher than they should and ignoring some of the guys that could be real values and steals later on in the draft.
Yeah, and I think that has something to do with like, when you're drafting in February, March, you just come in and you have all these, you kind of forget the reality of the NFL and you're like, oh, Charbonnet is definitely going to be the starter next year. Kenneth Walker, who needs Kenneth Walker? And then, same with Benson. Oh, this is Benson's year. And then the kind of reality sets in. People remind you a few times, how good JC was, in that Arizona offense. Dan, anything to add with kind of the macro approach or anything that Abib said so far?
Yeah, I think Abib's pretty much right on it with pretty much everything he said. Like I was in the pros versus Joe's draft last night with Bradley, and it's kind of wild how some things go because, we're looking at Patrick Mahomes dropping. And normally in these drafts, he's going, in best ball drafts, he's going somewhere in the 7th round, maybe if you're lucky, you might make it to the beginning of the 8th round. So we're picking like halfway through the 8th round and we're like, well, we really need a running back. And Jordan Mason is about the best running back we got available. And I'm afraid of what's going to be coming back to us, but I'm like, are we really passing on Patrick Mahomes for Jordan effing Mason here? And we ended up doing it, and Mahomes didn't go until like the 2nd pick of the 9th round or something like that. I mean, it was just crazy. So you do see, a few things as people start kind of building. Sometimes structure leads you away from something you might normally do. Like I thought that was crazy to pass up on Mahomes to a certain extent, but on the other hand, I'm looking at it. Hey, I can still get Brock Purdy. I can still get Dak Prescott, I can still get Justin Fields, I can still get J.J. McCarthy. I don't really need Mahomes that bad, especially in this kind of a thing where it's best ball, and I don't need to, I don't have to put a quarterback in my starting lineup. I can just, go with whatever. So, I think Abib's right on a lot of this, and especially what's I think pushing down those backup running backs is people are starting to push up the quarterbacks just a little bit, starting to push up the tight ends a little bit, trying to clean up at wide receiver, and leaving those really speculative running back picks to where they belong, which is, somewhere after the 10th round for sure, and preferably after the 12th or 13th round.
Before we get into the Abib's Texans, it is that time of year. We're talking about some of the movements on the ADP boards, but a lot of that has to do with kind of the fluff and the hype and all the headlines that we're seeing this time of year. Every little throw, every little drop, every little he's running with the first teams or the second teams. People react very very quickly, right? To the people are sensitive to these headlines because we're sitting here, we're waiting, we're just like, I want some news. I want something to either justify what I'm thinking or to give me something to jump on that maybe my league mates or the other drafters are not seeing. So let me ask you first, Abib, how do you handle that? How do you manage that, this time of year? Because there's so much of this fluff. Do you let it affect your drafts? Do you have kind of that, steal approach where you kind of want to look into it first? Like, how do you approach all that and manage it while you're doing these drafts this time of year?
One is just like understanding that I'm human. I'm like everybody else. I'm on Twitter. I'm reading it. I'm getting excited. I'm getting depressed. I'm getting angry. I'm getting happy. I'm getting sad. It's all, a lot of it's just sort of kind of just bias. Just kind of understanding that we all have bias, whether it was like you were in on a player and a positive piece of news comes out and it's a guy, running a wheel route against his running backs coach, with no defender in the background. So, to me, it's all data points. It's all data points. It's all data points. It's all data points. I think anytime I see a video clip, I almost always ignore it. Nothing from a video clip really moves the needle at all for me. It's almost like I see that and I almost like kind of just want to just like scroll right past it, or I actually get like a negative effect from that. I do kind of take into some of the, some account running with the ones, running with the twos, but it's really just a data point because I think, who's it, J.J. Watt? And then I wish I can remember this handle's names because he just, it was similar to the J.J. Watt tweet where it was just really well broken down, and it actually pertained to the Chicago Bears and how, there was a lot of news coming out early on in camp about how Caleb was just struggling through the offense, throwing picks and doing things like that. And he just sort of kind of, not J.J. Watt, but this handle that I can't remember. Maybe I'll try to tweet it out or retweet it. But just sort of kind of broke it down in perspective. Said, I really think, kind of the Chicago Bears beat writers are doing them a disservice. They're not really putting it into context. I think he kind of described it as a situation where that particular practice, the defense was set up to win. They were just like literally flooding them with blitzes. He was expected to lose. It's sort of kind of just like, bombarding him and throwing everything at him at once and just sort of kind of getting him to get acclimated to the pressure and then kind of working your way back from there. And so just things like that I like to hear because those are things that I either forget or I'm just not aware of. I love little nuggets like that to sort of kind of allow me to rethink like, hey, guy is like 9 for 9 in practice. Okay, number one, I'm not there in practice. We don't know what they're practicing. 7-on-7s is almost irrelevant to me. Were they all screens? Were they all dump offs? Like what type of passes were these? Was the defense going hard? Were the backups in? Was the coach out there, playing safety? I mean, all these things are things that like you can't take. So videos are just, are not it for me. And then same thing, like I said, running with the 1s and 2s. Sometimes it may just be a certain package. I try to like listen in for things that may be helpful. Like there was a nugget about DeAndre Swift, 2-minute drill. That to me was kind of helpful. The Tanks Bigsby situation. Okay, 2 data points in a row running with the 1s. Those are data points. It's not really altering my ADP all that much, but that's a data point. And the more data points that go towards Tanks Bigsby and, seeing Tootin now out with a hamstring, like those are data points. And so like those things will sort of kind of affect me. And if I'm like lightweight on Tank Bigsby and he's still going in the 12th, 13th round, I mean, that's an easy, sort of kind of just recalibrate and readjust, get me a few shares because I think we all know you played this game for any more than 2 or 3 years at all. You know that like you're going to be wrong. You're going to be wrong. Yep. We're just all, we're all just fighting to be the least wrong. I'm just trying to be not as wrong as somebody else. So, kind of keeping that into, in the back of my mind, it's, okay, I want to be able to adjust, but I don't want to make drastic decisions and moves where now I'm building bad teams that I'm not going to be happy with, And then there's just some guys that like I just close my eyes on, and I don't care what comes out of camp. It was a situation that I had assessed prior to camp, and I understood that there was not a lot of information I was likely going to be given into camp, and I was just going to have to roll with that dice. Like one guy for me like that is Travis Hunter. There's nothing that's going to come out of camp for me or in preseason that I think is going to be able to sway me one way or the other because they can put him in a, preseason game. I mean, you can only imagine all the variables that go into place in a preseason game of them maybe wanting to see what he looks like in nickel package or wanting to see what he looks like, in 3 wide receiver sets. And then people trying to extrapolate, his, percentage of snaps running on defense versus offense. Like to me, like that is just going to be them just sort of kind of like, playing around with things. Ultimately, we don't know what's going to happen with him in the regular season. So it's just a guy that like, I just kind of added up a bunch of different things, looked at all the positives, looked at all the negatives and say, you know what, 6th round, like I'm in, I'll live with that loss. But it's tough. I mean, I don't really have a great answer for that as far as, try to see where you missed. Always like kind of do a self-audit. I always try to remember back, okay, man, I remember that one camp news that came out that I was all over, changed my draft strategy and it was a miss. Or nuggets that were very, very helpful and seemed to be sort of kind of things that, really helped me out as far as drafting the right player. One thing I love to hear about receivers, the coaches are moving them around the formation. Like I love to hear that. I don't know why. But I feel like that's like an actual objective plus for me as far as, okay, that'll move the notch. But it's tough. Every situation is different. You got to look at each as like a data point. Sometimes that data point's a negative, sometimes it's a positive, and sometimes it's like a net neutral.
Philly Mike OG, I can't tell if he's trolling or if this is actually breaking news. But I feel like he's trolling. So until we verify that take on Matt Stafford in his season, we'll keep that in the chat for now. Dan, anything to add with I know this time of year, like if anything, I'm looking for negative buzz on like players that maybe I do like more than most or that kind of thing. So hoping I can get more value on them. But is there any way that you play kind of the fluff that we're hearing this time of year?
I mean, honestly, the first week or two of training camp, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to any of it because, this is a time when coaches are experimenting. They don't have games to prep for or anything else. They can get out there and they can try all the crazy stuff that they dreamed up all off season. So, they're going to have, and they're going to put players in with the 1s that aren't going to be 1s. They're going to put players in with the 2s that aren't going to be 2s. They're going to put all their players in different situations. They're going to try out some really weird formations and plays and everything else, putting guys in places they're not used to being, just to see what happens and see what works. Some of that might end up sticking through, but a lot of it, by the time you actually get down into preseason games, we're not really worried about this stuff anymore. So, to me, a lot of it's just, sit back, let the information flow. When you start seeing that steady drumbeat, and I know the three of us have talked about this before, you get that steady drumbeat of news, and it's coming from the coaches and not necessarily from, beat writers or speculators or everybody else, but you're getting a steady drumbeat from the coaches. Like if this Tank Bigsby thing turns into a steady drumbeat, yeah, then I'm going to start sitting up and paying attention. Right now, it's just kind of interesting. Maybe I do need to get a little more Bigsby, as Abib said, when he's dropping a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and just take a couple shares just in case. But, I still know that Tank Bigsby is Tank Bigsby. I don't think he's going to be the one who ends up leading that backfield, or if he does, I don't think he's going to lead it to the extent that it's going to be, turn him into a game breaker that I can't get around not having him on my teams. But, again, that's this time of year. People are just, the coaches are just doing whatever it is that they want to do. They're trying out the things they want to try out, and we just got to kind of sift through it and just not get too overly excited or emotional about it. Just, sit back, be calm, and draft on.
Yeah, for me, Bigsby, I've said this before. Like, I haven't seen him kind of take, like last year he had the opportunity, let's face it, right? Etienne just wasn't Etienne that we were hoping. And he had the opportunity. There was injuries in the offense. I just feel like he didn't capitalize on that. I mean, can he come back? I didn't know about Tootin's hamstring, so that's good to know. See, just for that, I'm glad that you're on tonight. So that gives me some. He's a guy, especially in rookie drafts, I've got a lot of, but it's good to know. But let's shift over to your hometown team. I know tonight we're talking NFC. We're going to get into it. We've got some storylines, some draft targets that you guys want to know about where Abib is putting his draft capital. But let's talk about your Texans. Because obviously Stroud, a rookie season that was historical, had a bit of a lull, I guess you could call it, last year relative to that rookie season. You've got Joe Mixon now with the foot issue, which is quote unquote unresolved. Nick Chubb comes in the offseason. You've got Woody Marks that they drafted. Christian Kirk comes over from the Jags. Obviously, Nico Collins, he's a stud, in my opinion. Love getting him kind of in the back end of that first, especially in the early second. And then you've got the two rookie receivers coming in Higgins and Noel. So why don't you give us your kind of takes on this offense, how you're approaching it, where you see maybe the targets and maybe who you're not necessarily looking to add to your rosters.
So one thing that I would just say, like right off the bat, this is going to be a very tough situation to handicap and figure out and just sort of kind of know who the targets are going to be after. We're going to be getting these targets after Nico Collins, because we have a brand new offensive coordinator coming in and we have a lot of new offensive weapons. And so I think, these types of situations, especially when the offensive coordinator really, he's been a couple of places in, with New England and with the Rams, but we've not really seen him kind of on his own. And I think it's going to be tough to know what type of offense he's going to be running. And for me, especially in today's NFL, I'm like offensive coordinator over everything. I think, a lot of these players aren't going to excel in the right kinds of offenses. And a lot of guys who are, mediocre or who would have mediocre fantasy output otherwise in the right system can really explode. So you obviously have Nico Collins, who's at the top. I think he is safe and fine where he is at the sort of kind of back end of the first round, 1-2 turn. I mean, you can make the pros, you can make the negatives. I mean, there's always going to be the kind of hype, he can be the number one overall. Those types of things. I feel like the market is pretty accurate with where he is. I wouldn't be surprised if he was top 2 or top 3, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was sort of kind of middle of the pack, just because, again, the offense. The offensive line is also obviously a big issue. I am a very much optimistic person, not just necessarily with my team, but like with football in general. I like to think that like a bad situation, will always sort of kind of regress towards the positive mean. And so we were the worst last year. I mean, can we just at least be 31? Can we at least be 30th in the league? I mean, that's kind of like where I'm at, from a mental standpoint. I don't know if it was just the guys giving up last year or not gelling right, or the run blocking, pass block. I don't know what it was, but obviously it was just a really, really bad situation last year. So really hard to kind of gauge, if a lot of it was on C.J. Stroud or the play callers or the offensive line. So I'm really intrigued to see kind of how and what the offensive line can do from a run blocking standpoint, from a pass blocking standpoint. It seems like we're going to be running a little bit more gap instead of outside zones this year. We got Chubb, we have Mixon, potentially anyway. Obviously, we have Mark, so we'll see what that looks like. But the passing game, which is what I know everybody kind of cares about, we've talked about this on the pod a lot. And pre-draft, I love Jaden Higgins and I love Jalen Noel. So, to get both of those guys, I love those guys. And to get both of them is just kind of insane to me. So, I think, that was definitely a situation last year where we got into the playoffs and then everybody got hurt and we looked at our bench and we literally had no one. No one stepped up. So I think the team didn't want to be in that same position this year. But obviously that was preceded by the trade of Christian Kirk. And, if these are very vague, blurry dots, but if you kind of connect some of these dots, poor offensive line, C.J. Stroud being asked to sort of kind of, take over the reins of the defense, being given a little bit more information this first year, I feel like he's going to need a safety blanket, He's going to need a quick read until he can kind of further get along. And to me, that quick read outside of Nico Collins is Christian Kirk. So right now you see Jaden Higgins going above Christian Kirk, and you can argue upside. I don't really believe in upside business. I mean, if this offense, really dedicates a lot of first and second reads to the slot, then that slot, whoever's manning the slot, is going to have the most upside. I don't care who's on the outside, right? If they have Jaden Higgins running a bunch of deep and post routes the entire game, and we can't even get to those progressions, or we can't get enough protection to actually get him the ball, then it's going to be Nico check down to maybe running back, or Nico, hit Christian Kirk, who's really good in short space. I think we forget how good Christian Kirk is. As much as I love Jalen Noel, I feel like, a successful career for him is actually turning into Christian Kirk, right? That's kind of almost my comp that I have for him. So I actually like Kirk, especially early on in this offense. But this is definitely one of those situations that I'm starting to see a lot in the NFL, where probably just get one of all of these guys. You can even a 20th round pick, get Noel, and just kind of keep him on standby. Because at some point in the season, people are going to get banged up. Or at some point in the season, as we get more information on what defenses are doing, and with all the new analytics that are out right now, certain, teams and certain players doing better in certain or against certain coverages, you'll be able to kind of figure out, oh, this is a Christian Kirk game, or this is absolutely a full-blown Nico game, Nico Collins game. And then I know everybody's out on Dalton Schultz, including me, but I'm not so out that I can't think that I don't think that he could be relevant in this offense. Because if he's a tight end or a tight end in this offense, I think, this is one of those situations where, again, I go back to, we don't know what this offense is going to be. So what if this offense, really is, one where it wants to get the tight end involved, and whoever that tight end is, they're taking away targets from those other receiving options. So I'm always very cautious of this type of receiving room, and that's why I like Kirk, because he goes so late. That's a bullet that I can spare, and I'll try to get some Higgins too as well. But it's not like I'm trying to get a bunch of Higgins, or I have a lot of confidence that he's going to be this breakout wide receiver this year.
Yeah, I laugh because even when Dan kind of made me laugh a bit, but I laugh mostly because even when I'm building a Texan stack, I just can't click on the Schultz, man. I just can't do it. I'd rather go 2 or 3 of the receivers and go with the Woody Marks or something, than get Schultz. So Dan, Higgins going in the 10th round right now in the main. Kirk goes a couple rounds later, and then Noel, like we said, kind of in those late rounds. Who are 1 or 2 of your favorite targets in this offense right now?
Yeah, I'm taking, for the most part, I'm taking Nico. I've been slow to come to Kirk. but I'm starting to come around on him. I've actually clicked that Dalton Schultz button a couple times anyway, just because he's been cheap enough, that it's you're not having to, he's going in like the 16th round or whatever, it's not like you're having to put a lot into him. And, I think an important point, the Beeb kind of at least hinted at is the fact that, he is a tight end, and tight ends are different than wide receivers. And so structurally, they're going to get their share of targets in an offense, unless it's one of those offenses that completely de-emphasizes a tight end. They're going to get their share of targets. So, even if the wide receiver room might be crowded, the tight end might still do all right. A good example of that would be like the Packers, Tucker Kraft, looks like last year he got a pretty good, amount of targets, despite the fact that there was 15 other wide receivers running around him, but still he's the tight end, which means, there's going to be certain types of passes and plays that go his way. So, that same sort of thing can happen with Dalton Schultz. So, when I see a player getting punished as bad as Schultz is right now, compared to the previous season, I'm like, I don't know if I can go along with this. I might have to get me a few shares.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this offense unfolds. If that offensive line is, kind of stabilized, and CJ Stroud does have a bit of time, and it's gonna be interesting to see if Mixon is back and when he's back and what this whole foot injury. I know I drafted him. I thought was at a value with Stroud and Collins in a draft I'm doing right now, a redraft, and 2 days later the news came out that he's got some kind of foot issue that is we're going to get more clarification, quote unquote, as we get closer to the season. So we're going to come back on the other side
I got one quick
question.
Sorry,
go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, a little bit more for us on your thoughts on Woody Marks. Anything that you got, Abib?
I'm going to lean on my pre-draft process with this, and I just was not, overly enamored. I don't even think he's all that much of a third down back. I mean, I just think it was just sort of kind of the offense that he was in. But it seems like that's what they drafted him for. I don't know what to make of Nick Chubb. I don't, because his situation is so complicated. You can't really look at last year, his first year being off the ACL, and where he was, knowing that it oftentimes takes, especially a running back, at least 1+ year to kind of make its way fully back. I mean, look at Saquon, look at a number of running backs who've had ACL tears. Obviously, he's a lot older. From what I can gather from a medical standpoint, the foot issue from last year shouldn't really be something that hinders him. So in my mind, I'm kind of, thinking back to last year and maybe like adding 15 to 20%, of that. And if you're kind of getting that, like, that's serviceable from a Nick Chubb. I think we forget how much of an elite talent he was. And so if he's 80% of what he was, isn't that pretty much Mixon? I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. So I'm not saying I really haven't been drafting much of Nick Chubb. This has kind of been a situation where I feel like we could see guys in roles more than anything else. When I just kind of look at the makeup of this team and the goals of this team, I don't see this as a team that really wants to feature one guy and have him get all the work in the regular season and then not have them be fresh in the playoffs. So I think they, will spread the work around. I think Dare, from a Texan standpoint, I can just remember a number of crucial situations on third down in the hurry up where he was money. So that's another name too that not that he would ever have a feature role, but what if he's just a third down guy and Marks is sort of kind of his understudy, I would almost see Marks as maybe being able to take over the Mixon role and kind of being 1B to Nick Chubb. And then I just don't see them trusting Marks in the 2-minute hurry up and on third down his rookie year with a bad offensive line. Something about that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I'm kind of almost looking at Marks as like a RBBC, in between the tackles, because Chubb is probably getting the goal line work, and then really not getting a ton of receiving work, The other thing, too, with C.J. Stroud, he wasn't really wasn't really big on checkdowns. And so, there's a lot that I feel like of what ifs and a lot that I had to buy into before I can see Woody Marks as the league winner. But who knows?
Yeah, I think Mixon's health will really, determine how much of the passing game, how much of the running game, and if this is a committee, like you talk about with roles. It's an interesting offense for sure, and we'll see how this offense unrolls. So let's take a quick word from our friends at the FFPC, and on the other side, we're going to hit the NFC hard. Code DRBALLER, DR Baller. If you're new to the FFPC, myffpc.com, you can literally play from $5 all the way to a few $1,000s. Leagues, dynasty, redraft, tournaments, 12-man leagues, you name it, they have it over at the FFPC, and that code will give you $25 off your first team. Guys, let's jump into the NFC. Lots to talk about. Dan, I don't think this is going to be one of our condensed short versions of the show that we keep saying we're going to try to do. We're going to try to not keep Abib too long, but let's jump into the Philadelphia Eagles first. Obviously, Saquon coming off of a historical season. You've got, fresh off of a Super Bowl over there in Philadelphia. And then you've got their major weapons. So Jalen Hurts kind of at the back end of the QB1s. You've got AJB. Abib's kind of like the AJ Brown of the FFPC, where like he won it the first time and he's on stage getting the trophy and he's already talking about the next season and how he's going to take it down. So I love that. I love that comparison. Devontae Smith, I think, is sneaky good every season and can maybe take a step this year. Goddard is kind of like the uncle that nobody likes in that offense, but I mean, he produces, man. He produced in the playoffs. So how are you approaching this offense? Do you think Barkley is justified at his value right now? Meaning, like for 2025, do you think he can live up to that ADP? And how are you seeing the passing game out there in Philly? Oh, sorry, Abib, that was for you, brother.
I thought Dan was going first. I think this is honestly an offense that I've loved to target. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but they're like 3-game stretch to end the year during the money weeks. I think is one that is like what dreams are made of. So the beautiful thing about this offense is I think that based on this sort of kind of recency bias, we're getting to get these guys at cost. Like I think AJ Brown, we're getting at cost from his production last year, and he missed time. Barkley was obviously, elite last year, and even he's fallen kind of in the mid rounds. Jalen Hurts, I think we're getting at a significant bargain. Even Devontae Smith is, going to the back end of the 5th, 6th round. If he just sort of kind of produces what he did last year, he's not going to kill you. He'll be sort of kind of a solid wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 option. So what I love about this team is just, again, we just sort of kind of talk about regression. If there's anything you can kind of like maybe lean on, or that I lean on from a metric standpoint in NFL, it's just regression. It's one of the few things where we just have tons of data on and we can just see, okay, if it was like an historical outlier, like the amount of plays they ran in the fourth quarter, the amount of pass attempts they had in the fourth quarter, the leads that they had going into the fourth quarter, how they were able to take their foot off the gas, all of that was just a historical outlier. The pass attempts overall throughout the entirety of the season, overall outlier. Saquon Barkley's production, overall outlier. So to me, I'm really kind of attacking this passing game because I feel like at the worst case scenario, I just got them at cost. Barkley is definitely someone who I just sort of kind of have a general rule of usually fading the running back who finishes number 1 overall, unless that guy is just really heavily involved in the passing game, because then I just feel like you're just asking him to do too much. I'm just asking him to like have this historical year on the ground without really much to supplement in the passing game in a PPR league. I just don't want to play that game. I'm just going to be fine like missing out on him. He's not giving you the Christian McCaffrey, LaDainian Tomlinson numbers. So even if he does what he did last year, which, if he's falling to like the back end of the first round, I think I drafted him at like the 109 the other day to have a share, then yeah, I'll take my stabs. But if I'm at the top end of the draft, I'm pretty much with Market as far as, maybe holding off on him. But AJ Brown, I really love. Jalen Hurts, probably my highest drafted of the top tier quarterbacks. I just think that to me, he still hasn't kind of given us, I think, that just break the slate, break the season type of QB1 performance. And it's very, very much within his wheelhouse. I mean, if you just scroll through your timeline today, you can see all the injuries that have taken place, not just, offensive tackles, cornerbacks. I mean, so anything can happen in a season. They're already slated to have a much more competitive, outlook throughout the season. So that, the idea that they're just going to be so far ahead in games, they can take their foot off the pedal, I think is, something that for me is, I'm not betting on. But that passing game is definitely one that I've been investing in. Goddard, I don't know that I've gotten there, but the other three, I'm all in.
Oh, you're on mute, JD. JD, mute.
What a rookie mistake. I got a fly around me and it's just driving me nuts. I muted it so you guys don't hear the swapping. But I was just saying, as my lips are moving, I kind of feel the same way about this offense, that it's going to be a bit more of an aerial game than we saw last year. And with Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown, I love how they're both kind of the last ones in their tier. Like for me, A.J. Brown belongs with that second tier of receivers, and he comes kind of at the back end of that tier, moving into the back end of the second round, sometimes into the third round. And then Jalen Hurts as well, if you want one of those elite QBs. And I saw you do that the other day in the main event that you guys had over there, 1st and 15, taking Jalen Hurts after that top tier was gone, like the top three. And to me, you're getting a nice value there because you can compete with those teams now, but you didn't have to invest the same amount of capital. Dan, anything to add? I know we talk about Shipley, being kind of like a nice little sleeper in this offense just because of maybe we're not investing in Barkley at his current price. How are you playing this Eagles offense this year?
Yeah, I'm pretty much right where Abib was at. I really like A.J. Brown. I mean, JD, I was Mr. A.J. Brown 101 a few years
that's right.
back. And
you were. So, you were the OG.
That was the drum I was beating. We're not at 101 territory anymore, but I sure do like him in the back half of the second round. That's a great price, and that's something I'll speculate on all day long. Because with Barkley, it's just it is a lot of touches, and as Abib was saying, he was not getting that many receptions, not getting that many targets, and he's got Jalen Hurts stealing touchdowns at the goal line. It's real easy to imagine how things go wrong for Saquon, and if things go wrong for Saquon, then kind of the next thing I want to be invested in is Hurts in the passing game. So that's where I'm kind of putting most of my investment. And as Abib said, if Saquon drops a little bit, yeah, I'll go ahead and get a share because, he and Barkley and Christian McCaffrey are starting to converge here. Last night, the pros versus Joes, we actually saw McCaffrey go before Barkley. McCaffrey went 6 and Barkley went 7. So it was kind of a weird situation that happened last night, but. And I think that's probably going to become a little bit more common as people get more comfortable with McCaffrey and a little bit, more spooked by Barkley. So, but yeah, that A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts are my favorite ways to play it.
Yeah, and you can see it right there on the screen. This is the last 15 days with Fantasy Mojo in the main event, but you see Barkley and CMC right beside each other. And you talked about CMC, Abib, kind of the value you're getting on him earlier in the offseason, in the second, sometimes even into the third round, I think, like early offseason. But like you said, Dan, they're converging those two. And I think that'll be crucial this year on how we play that as fantasy players for 2025. Now, let's go to Dallas. Some injury news today with offensive tackle Tyler Guyton possibly having a torn ACL in practice today. So obviously that offensive line gets a big nick. They bring in Pickens. CeeDee Lamb, was without Dak most of last season. And then Jake Ferguson is back this season off of a big signing, actually, just recently in the last few days, big renewal contract for him. Now, what pieces in this offense, Abib, are you targeting, and are any of them being overdrafted? And of course, you have to tell us how you're attacking this backfield.
So it looks like guy may have been spared the ACL. Looks like maybe it's just a bone fracture and out for a season per Schefter. This is a beautiful thing of not having to do everything that JD does. Is I can sit here and like scroll through Twitter. Dan knows
You
what I'm
don't have
talking
to
about.
swat flies, man.
No, I don't swap flies.
I just got it.
I don't have to worry about all the things that go on the recording. I think this is an offense that I've definitely been investing in. I think per my ranks, I have CD as like the number 2 overall wide receiver. I'm not necessarily huge on Dak like everyone else is, just because he goes where a lot of guys go that I really like. Like I like Brock Purdy as much as I like Dak Prescott. And I feel like Purdy probably offers, oddly enough, a little bit more on the rushing side of things. I just think Dak coming off kind of this hamstring injury, being a little bit older, he already wasn't running a lot to begin with. Let's be honest. I mean, if you're not a Cowboys fan, we all know that they're just fragile, right? They're just fragile. They're like, something's always going to go wrong, right? So you never want to be too invested in this team. But obviously, like the guy I think has been getting the most hype is George Pickens, and that's been a tough one for me, just because for me to get George Pickens where he's going now, I have to basically bypass a lot of other guys that I'm just as high on, who I believe can be either the number 1 target in their offense or, can compete to be the number 1 target in their offense. I just don't see that with George Pickens. But the caveat to that is that, if this is just sort of kind of, 2025 Cincinnati Bengals, and this is Chase and Higgins and CD, and Pickens, then it doesn't matter. So I think my mind is having a hard problem sort of kind of coming to grips with that. I'll probably have to force a few Pickens shares, because that's just one of the situations where you can't necessarily guess, but nobody's going to be surprised if Pickens has 12 to 15 touchdowns at the end of the year. And if he does that, it doesn't matter how many receptions he has. He's going to, be a huge win in the 6th, 5th round, which is kind of, where he's going right now. Ferguson has been a guy that I've been drafting recently. I feel like he can really clean up in the intermediate, short, sort of kind of short field, routes. I will say that my one issue with Ferguson is when I watched him last year, it just seemed that he just lacked, and maybe somebody can confirm this with, actual objective data, he seemed to lack a lot of yak. They seemed to not really have him running, I think routes where he was running up the seam. He just seemed to be kind of like the leak out, the safety valve. And although they can get you a lot of receptions, I feel like his upside is really, really capped. He's kind of the opposite of George Kittle. So I don't know if that was a Dak injury thing or if that was a real thing, but I still like where he goes in an offense where, getting to the run game, I just don't, it's just non-existent. I've tried to figure this out. I've tried to really kind of land on one player. And I'm a UT alum. I'm a Longhorn alum, go Longhorns. So I've had the luxury of seeing Jaden Blue for multiple years. And there's nothing that, I've seen over these multiple years that leads me to believe that he's going to somehow take over this backfield. I could be wrong, but I just don't see it at all, which is usually I'm willing to take a chance. So I've almost just X'd him off of my list. I'll probably have 0 Jaden Blue unless he drops to the 15th round. The news was almost irrelevant to me. It was just sort of kind of information that I had prior. Javonte Williams, I don't. He was multiple years removed from his knee injury and just looked like he was running in mud. So that really hard for me to buy that. Okay, now this is the year where he's healthy. Miles Sanders, he goes late enough, so I do have some shares. But you've been listening to First and 15. We're just taking random shots at Phil Maffa.
Phil Maffa, baby.
Until they bring it. Until they bring it.
Dan and I about the Phil Maffa.
Yeah. Until they bring somebody else in, I think maybe I'm just going to wait and Phil Maffa. Because it could be just one of those situations where it's just very frustrating. If you remember Rico Dowdle last year, definitely he was an ADP win, but were you really winning many leagues with Rico Dowdle? And he ended up taking over the job last year. So it's just kind of one of those situations where I feel like even if I lose out on the guy, I'm probably not losing much.
Dan Schottenheimer today was quoted, starting to feel Phil. And I know in rookie drafts, he's a fun guy to get. He's a big dude. He's a big dude. I think we're almost drawing, what's that saying, Dan? Drawing at straws or what is that?
Oh yeah, drawing. Yeah, I know the saying you're trying.
You know
to
what I'm
say.
saying? Like with this backfield, I feel like people
Yeah.
are just trying to pick their favorite.
Yep.
But is it going to really make a difference? Do you
Yep.
think in
Draw
fantasy land
straws.
in 2025?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, yeah, I mean, I think Abib is pretty much right on. I mean, I like Dak this year. For no other reason than it is an odd numbered year, and every time it's an odd numbered year, he just balls out, and the even numbered years he doesn't. So there's your stat for the day. That's it is science. That is analytics at its finest. All you gotta do is look. I mean, 2019 he was QB2, 2021 is quarterback 6, 2023 is quarterback 3. I mean, come on, it's science. So, but other than that, yeah, CeeDee Lamb is an easy click for me. Ferguson is a pretty easy click for me at his ADP, and I'm kind of with Abib. Pickens is just there's always somebody I like more than Pickens, and it's like I keep telling myself, you know what, Dan, you probably need to at least get some Pickens going here because if we're not perfect. We do make lots of mistakes. We're wrong a lot. So I might be wrong on Pickens, and but every time I'm like, but I can get I can get Zay Flowers, or I can get Calvin Ridley or whoever. It's like it's just hard to take him. So
Cortland Sutton.
Cortland Sutton. Yeah. So I'm definitely with you there, Abib. I think I think you're playing the Cowboys right, and the backfield. It's I'll take whoever out of that backfield when they drop below ADP, if I'm looking for a running back, but I'm not particularly tied to any of them real hard.
Yeah, I mean, Ferguson's really nice at his price. And, one thing these shows are good for, Dan, it's almost like a therapy session, because, apart from our little chats and what you hear out there in the X machine and stuff like that, how you've been drafting certain players and how your ownership goes. But then when you hear guys like Abib come on and yourself, Dan, talk, like Pickens, the guy that I just either someone gets to him before me in the draft room, or like you said, I see him there and there's just guys that I just prefer taking ahead of him. I know I've got him like on a couple dynasty teams, but he's not someone I have a high ownership on. It might kind of bite me in the what. But another team that brought in a pretty strong wide receiver too. I mean, some people think he might even be the wide receiver 1 out there in LA with Puka Nacua getting a new teammate in Devontae Adams. I know that's another player that you had on your most recent stream, Abib, in that main event. Going in like the 3rd round right now. Obviously, I don't know if Mike was serious about the Stafford news or not, but I know there's some back concerns with Stafford, so maybe Jimmy G comes in for a handful of games this year. But what's your approach with this LA Rams offense? And similar to, obviously you've got the 2 big studs at the receiving point or at the receiving position. You've got a rookie tight end that comes in now, Tyler Higsby comes in off injury this year. And then you've got the running backs behind Kyron Williams, obviously with, Jarquez, and then Corum, who's there from last year, who we haven't really seen much from yet, but there were high hopes coming in. So how are you approaching kind of this Rams offense as a whole? Who you targeting and who maybe you fading?
Kind of a tough situation just from a standpoint. Like I said, this team is also fragile. Their quarterback specifically, he's entering into, I don't know what season, but already with the back injury. But for me, recalling back to last year, we had the same questions. We had the same issues with this exact team. This is like kind of an older team. Puka's going high, Kupp is going high. Stafford's old, had injuries before that, and kind of entering into the offseason. Do we really want to invest high draft capital? And I think for the most part, per game, most of the guys did well. Kyron, kind of lived up to at least, being an RB1, and Puka, while healthy, was a guy. I'm all in on Devontae Adams. Definitely have him as a top 12 wide receiver. I like this sort of kind of built-in, I don't want to call it Cooper Kupp role, but just the narrow target tree and the vacated targets and, the way he finished the season last year. Obviously, he's not prime Devontae Adams, but he's still Devontae Adams, and he was still producing at quite a high level last year. So I just think in an offense like this, where he's going to be schemed open, and then when he gets to play off of Egbuka Nacua, it's just going to be really hard to sort of kind of, zero in on him. I think he's going to ideally get a lot of looks. Worst case scenario, Jimmy G's back there. Hopefully they've made up and made amends, but I still think even in that situation, with Devontae going where he goes in the back end of the third round, it's still, love. I've been off Kyron Williams. I was off Kyron Williams last year in redraft. I'm off of him again this year, unless he falls to, again, past ADP. It just, kind of just one of those situations where you can see a lot of different things going wrong. He fumbled quite a bit last year, wasn't necessarily the most explosive, was a beast at the goal line, is in a, somewhat high-powered offense. So I can't fault anybody for taking him. It's just, for me, I think I'm just probably going to go elsewhere. Puka, I love where he goes. Same kind of scenario with Nico Collins. I could see Puka really being the number one overall in certain situations, but could also see him getting hurt. If you own Puka, and I own him in both dynasty leagues or a couple dynasty leagues that I'm in, you watch him play, and it's just one of those situations where he takes hard hits. He goes to the sideline, and you're not sure if he's going to come back into the game. And this happens almost like every single game. So he's a scary player to own, but the production is not deniable. The only question, with this team is, does the third receiving option really matter? Are they rosterable? Who's going to be the handcuff when inevitably somebody gets hurt, in the receiving game? Or do they lean more on the tight ends? Is Terrence Ferguson the thing? And then, specifically with the backups, the thing I have the biggest question on, and I don't really know the answer. I know people want it to be Jacquez Hunter, or at least that's what the market has it at, but I don't know that Blake Corum doesn't slide in as a handcuff to Kyron if he gets hurt, or gets hurt this year. So.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think, with Corum, he looked to me to be maybe even less explosive than Kyron last year. I don't know. I mean, we didn't see a lot of him, and it also looked like he was, I don't know, every time he was in, it sort of looked like the offensive line gave up before, he could even get to him. It was like he was getting hit behind the line of scrimmage a lot more than anybody else. So it was just kind of a weird situation, and the nice thing is we've got McVay saying all the right things about Kyron Williams. The thing that scares me is, it was just a couple of years ago he was saying all the right things about Cam Akers. So, we know how that can go. I haven't really got too many Rams on most of my teams. It's just where they're falling, I'm just having a hard time clicking on them. With Puka Nacua, I kind of rather have Nico or Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors for sure. So he's been a little bit tough for me to click. I've been having a tough time clicking also on Devontae Adams, just from where he's going. Though that one's been a little bit of an easier click, but they're just, I don't know. It's a tough team for me to draft right now. I'm not sure how I feel about them. I'm a little bit concerned about Stafford, but not really. I mean, this is a time of year where you don't want to push him. A back injury. It's sore is what they're saying. Is that an injury or is it sore? I don't know. I'm no doctor. So I have a hard time saying that it's anything to really be worried about. They're doing the exact right thing, which is just rest him. He doesn't need training camp anyway. So I'm not super worried about Stafford, but and with Garoppolo in there, I don't think it's a huge step down from Stafford, as long as McVay is a coach. So I don't know. I'm all over the map on these guys.
Yeah, I think Stafford, like if you are going to do a 3 QB build, maybe you waited later and you double tap in the mid rounds or, in the early teen rounds and you want to add Stafford as a third quarterback or Higbee as a third tight end. That's kind of how they play into my, apart from, the obvious guys in Adams and Puka. Kyron, I don't have a lot of. I've got him on a couple dynasty teams. Just the way the drafts went earlier in the offseason, he's a guy you can get at a pretty good value in dynasty just because, he's, like you guys said, there's a bit of fear there with how McVay's going to play this backfield and how much he actually loves Kyron, because you mentioned Akers, Dan, and we saw what happens there. Guys, make sure you smash that like button if you're watching right now. Abib's spending some time with us, dropping some good nuggets. And make sure you subscribe. Tomorrow night, we've got Mike Shope, the voice of the Buffalo Bills. We're going back-to-back. We've got the back-to-back champ, and we're going back-to-back this week. So tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Eastern, we've got Mike Schopp. We're going to hit the AFC and focus in on the Buffalo Bills. Let's go to San Fran. I know, Abib, your tight end one is my favorite tight end for sure. In George Kittle, you mentioned recently he's your tight end one. What's your thoughts? Obviously, you've got Jennings now looking for a contract. You've got Aiyuk coming off of injury. CMC is, we know what he can do, but can he come back and do that after 3 injuries last year? How are you approaching this offense out there in San Fran?
It comes down to just vacated targets and talent. Sometimes when targets are vacated, we kind of look at the next guys up and we tell ourselves the stories of how they are great and how they can be, they're in this tier of wide receivers and this and that. And not to take anything away from Jennings or what he can or what he can't be, but he's not George Kittle, So I just kind of putting myself in the mind of, Kyle Shanahan. And if I'm looking at this preseason and, immediately after, the season ends and I look around to see what I have, knowing Aiyuk is coming off a pretty severe multi-ligament knee injury, knowing that I've lost or traded away Debo. Pearsall, has kind of battled through injuries most of his career. And I understand, I know he's a late first round pick, but he's not, this elite level wide receiver talent. And I look at a guy like George Kittle, who's just been nothing but absolutely dominant from a yak standpoint, from a consistency standpoint. As long as he's been healthy, this guy just produces. So we saw that one year where he just dominated in the targets, and really just sort of kind of broke out, but we just haven't seen it since. And he really hasn't had to be that guy. And I think maybe they've gotten more value out of him blocking, but I actually like the fact that CMC is back. I like the credit or the threat, I should say, of a running back who can be dominant or is shown to be dominant that defenses have to worry about, but who can also play a very strong role in a passing game. I mean, this offense with Kittle and CMC, regardless of who's out, wide, is going to give defenses a lot of fit. And so I just see a situation where, you can see double-digit TDs, but you can also see him really kind of approach that 100-plus target level. And with his jack percentage, as long as he stays healthy, I think points per game, he'll do what he did last year, which was be number 1 overall tight end, not in pretty much all formats, including tight end premium. So I love that bet, and I love where he goes in drafts. Somehow, it's rare to have a guy that's drafted that high be your number 1 owned anything, and he's my number 1 owned, I think, tight end. And let me just check real quick because I wanted to pull this up so I can stay honest with you guys. But he's my number 1 owned player. So I mean, and I've done a ton of redrafts. I'm 40 plus in redrafts. So scary, right? But he's my number 1 owned player. So, could definitely be wrong, but that's just kind of, for me, this is everything that I talked about, but really it's also one of those sort of kind of gut feelings that I'm just rolling with, close my eyes and I'll live with the consequences.
I don't think you can go wrong with Kittle. He's kind of like your Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry is my most owned player right now, and you kind of cuddle up with him at night. You don't want to hear any bad news, on the X machine or any day. But the man's consistent, man. He's consistent, and he's a tough dude. So if there's anyone you want to own a lot of, it's definitely George Kittle. And Dan, that offense has a very favorable schedule this year, so it's kind of easy to click on those 49ers this year. How are you approaching the offense in drafts right now?
Yeah, I mean, Brock Purdy is one of my favorite targets at quarterback because, I think you can get him a couple rounds cheaper than you can get a Bo Nix or, Patrick Mahomes or Baker Mayfield or any of those guys. And, I think he can play as well or better than any of them. I mean, when we're talking about real football, then that might be a different story. I'm not going to sit here and try to compare Purdy to Mahomes, but from fantasy football standpoint, and unless Mahomes starts picking it up and throwing 50 TDs, probably, pretty much hold his own with him. So that's an easy way to get, because then I don't have to get all the receivers right and everything else. And as JD, as you know, I've been big on Kittle all off season as well. So that's you and I have been talking about that, and we've been drafting a ton of them. So He is my second favorite way to play it. And basically, when you think about who is Shanahan going to want to put the ball into their hands, it's going to be basically McCaffrey, Kittle, and then everybody else is kind of fighting for third place. So I want first and second place on this offense. The big question with McCaffrey is, can he hold up? I don't know, but I'm going to have at least a couple shares and find out.
Yeah, and we talk about vacated targets. Debo was one of the best kind of short, intermediate type of game, and Kittle just can step right in and kind of take some of those targets as well, on top of what we've already seen him. Another receiving situation that's interesting is out in Tampa, Abib, with obviously they bring in Egbuka. Chris Godwin is injured right now. I find he's a really nice value in drafts right now. You talk about approaching the season in quarters. That's something I talk about a lot, is when you're drafting these guys, it's like you're putting a puzzle together. You're not drafting these guys to give you 17 weeks each. You're looking for these guys to fit into your roster so that they play in your starting lineup at certain points of the season. How do you approach the receivers out in Tampa Bay with Godwin? Evans, obviously, you're 12 now. The rookie coming in. You've got Otten, who flashed when the receivers were injured. You had Liam Cohen there. He's gone. So a lot of changes happening in this offense. Baker staying now the consistent, which is interesting to talk about. But how are you approaching this Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense?
Phrase that. I love the way you put that. I think I'm probably not in on Otten. But the other four, I have no issue with anyone drafting. I think that they can be very helpful at any point in the season. I mean, I can tell myself a story of Mike Evans being that vet go-to early in the year, someone that Baker trusts. Is always a guy in the red zone. Okay, that's always Baker's favorite target in the red zone. He's always going to look to Mike Evans first. So you have that sort of kind of built into it. If Chris Godwin gets off to a slow start, I know we love Emeka, and I was, drafting a lot of Emeka, especially when he was late. Wasn't really. I'm not really a huge fan of his from the standpoint of I think he's like this high-end, wide receiver prospect. But I think he's a very solid wide receiver, which in an offense like this can just be huge for fantasy. But I could definitely tell myself a situation where it's actually McMillan early on in the season because he's coming into his, second year with as much buzz as Emeka has gotten. McMillan has also gotten buzz, It's just what gets put out on the Twitter. But if you actually go through The Athletic or you go through and actually read the entire beat reports and the articles, you'll read articles about how McMillan has really stepped up too as well. So I could see myself, I could see a situation where the OC is just saying, you know what, let's just trust this guy. He's been here. Let's have him sort of kind of get his what he deserves from being in the organization, working hard throughout the offseason. And then Emeka kind of comes on slowly. And then you can kind of see yourself, tell yourself a situation where like the last half of the year, Godwin's now healthy. Mike Evans has fallen off a cliff. Emeka is now overpassed McMillan. And both Godwin and Emeka are both like, the receivers are on. And then obviously anybody can get hurt at any point. But that's an offense, definitely you have to account for Liam Cohen leaving. But, ideally it's sort of kind of just carrying forward what they did last year. But it's an offense like the passing game I want to be heavily invested in. So I try not to leave my draft without one of those guys.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And, probably my favorite one to click is the Eggman. I mean, Egbuka is getting tons of great press, and he's still going, basically in the wide receiver 40s, wide receiver 45 in the Gorilla, wide receiver 47 or something like that in the best ball. So you're talking a player who was drafted in the first round, who's going to a team where they play a ton of 11 personnel, and he looks to probably be one of the top 3 wide receivers on the team, especially out of the gates with Godwin potentially missing time. So, there's an awful lot to like here. I mean, just everything seems to be lining up for Egbuka. So that's been one of my favorite clicks. I probably need to get into some more McMillan because, I mean, Abib, the story you're telling of, hey, he could be heavily involved early, and, if Godwin is struggling early, and then if Evans is struggling later, McMillan was scoring a lot of touchdowns at the end of last year. So I could definitely see a world in which, if Evans is kind of faded down the stretch and McMillan is, just chunking away. And so I definitely like to get more of him. But, the toughest click for me has probably been Bucky Irving just because of where he's going. Have you been getting a ton of him, Abib?
Don't think I have one share. But
I don't. I was just thinking. I don't either.
Wow.
Yeah, and I like him. His size worries me, and then it's just kind of one of those situation where you can draft him, but then I'm passing on guys that I think I'm higher on. Like Chase Brown was like a guy that I was like not I was going to draft ahead of Bucky Irvin, Jonathan Taylor. I'm going to draft ahead of Bucky Irvin, AJ Brown. I'm going to draft ahead of Bucky Irvin, and keep in mind though also too, this is I was getting a lot of Kenneth Walker coming back to me. So in the back of my mind, I was like, I could get Bucky Irvin here, and then whatever wide receiver falls for it, or I can get AJ Brown, and I can just get Kenneth Walker, right there. So it's a scary fade. I don't want to fade him indefinitely, but I'll probably end up with some shares. But he's not someone where I feel like where he's going that I'm really taking a huge chance going elsewhere.
So crazy. You said that, Dan, and I was thinking this. He's one of those guys that I just. There's so much more to like in that range when I actually see him there, or he goes, sooner than I would like to take him. Let's go to Dan's home team, the Minnesota Vikings. I know Dan and I are really big on JJ McCarthy this year and what he can do for this offense. Are you as optimistic as we are with his kind of rookie season this year and what he can do for the weapons around him? How are you approaching this offense in Minnesota?
One where I think I may need you guys to talk me off the ledge and maybe we'll be back in from all the OTA and camp news. This was actually one of the most difficult players because there was just news all over the place. But it's hard to know really how well he's doing in camp. And when I started off drafting, I was like, oh my God, JJ McCarthy is the steal of the draft. I need to get him in the 18th round. So I have him on a lot of teams, but I've definitely slowed down. I've definitely now been kind of maybe buying more into the narratives that this offense is maybe geared more towards, getting and relying more on the run game a bit more, maybe with the offensive line, I don't know, heading in that direction a bit. The defense is obviously what the defense is, but this is a tough situation for me. So Justin Jefferson is sort of kind of falling below CD. I don't have a ton of Jordan Addison. I don't know what to make of TJ Hawkinson, where he goes, because, is he going to be the number 2 or the number 3 in that offense? Do they change what they did last year? Because last year, I know he was coming off the ACL, but even then, it just seemed like they used a lot of tight ends. I don't recall what the other guy's name was, but every time the ball would go to a tight end, I would get excited. I'd be like, oh, that's not TJ Hawkinson. That's not TJ Hawkinson. So I do have a lot of question marks about whether or not this is a really, really good NFL team and whether or not the offensive skill players are going to live up to their ADP. But I don't know. What do you guys sway me one way or the other on this?
All right, JD, shall I jump in? Yeah. So
do it.
I'm kind of with you, Abib, on McCarthy's been moving up the draft boards, and so it's making him a little bit tougher to draft because he hasn't been, the extreme value that he was. When all of a sudden, you're drafting around the same area as Brock Purdy and and Dak and not far after Justin Fields and guys like that. It makes it a little bit tougher to hit that button. But what I keep coming back to is Kevin O'Connell took Sam Darnold, and turned him into the quarterback 7 in 2024, and this was behind a worse offensive line. And Darnold, I don't think is as good of a talent as JJ McCarthy is. It's hard to say because JJ McCarthy we haven't seen at the pro level, but Darnold definitely has his flaws, and those are pretty well known at this point. Yet O'Connell was able to take him, make him the quarterback 7. So, it gives me a reasonable amount of optimism that he's going to be able to do as well with J.J. McCarthy. I really do like the running game, though, because a lot of times when you have that rookie quarterback, they tend to get a little bit more conservative around the goal line until you find out, can this rookie handle, throwing the ball in the red zone? Or is it someplace where you'd rather have more run plays and, and just use the, the passes, the change up there. So But I like Hawkinson. I think, we're kind of getting a discount on him compared to where he was going a couple of years ago. And I'll take that discount because we've seen a lot of times rookie quarterbacks, the tight end is sort of their best friend. Obviously, when you've got a Justin Jefferson, that's really your best friend. But Hawkinson is a good second. And with Addison missing the first couple weeks, I mean, I think, we could see McCarthy settle into a comfort zone with Hawkinson. And, Hawkinson is just one of those guys that, man, when you watch the Vikings, he's always open. He's not one of those guys who's going to be streaking down the middle a lot, but he's gonna catch the ball and he's going to turn around, get upfield for a few yards, and just kind of rack up those catches. So, last year he didn't get a single touchdown. I expect that to change. So overall, I'm pretty optimistic. The guy I'm kind of fading right this year is Aaron Jones. I think I'd rather have Jordan Mason. I think I think he's at this point in his career a better runner than Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones definitely a better receiver, but again, I could see Jordan Mason punching in like 10 touchdowns or something like that. If he does that, I think he's probably going to return value.
See, I mean, this is why I try to sneak in my thoughts before I pass it to Dan, because he'll always steal my thunder. I'm all about that Jordan Mason love. I mean, Jordan Mason back in March was going like in the 12th, 13th round. I was drafting him before he ended up in Minnesota. I just loved what I saw from him in San Fran. And for him to land in Minnesota is just like gold for me. Like Dan avoiding Aaron Jones in his 30-plus years, and has got a lot of mileage there in as an RB1. And I just think they've already got Jordan Mason as, we've heard again, if it's true or not, as the goal line guy. I just think he's going to work his way in and become, if not the guy, at least kind of that 60 of the 60-40 in that offense. And I just love that offense as a whole, with the DHC over there in Vikings land. So yeah, there's, it's an offense that they're in a division where they're going to have to score a lot. And, whether it's the running game, but JJM is going to be kind of the key to all that, right? So how good is he going to be? But like Dan said, for me, the key is like, look at what we saw from Darnold, as I don't even know what you want to call him.
Or Nick Mullins or
Nick
Josh
Mullins or any of
Dobbs.
those guys. Yeah, any of those guys that have come in. So I think that if he can live up to kind of the hype that we had for him coming in as a rookie, I think it's going to be a good season. He'll be a nice surprise for Fantasyland. Now, Chicago's definitely an interesting one. You've got Ben Johnson coming in as the head coach for the Bears. You've got Caleb coming in as into his second season, not the best rookie season that we maybe expected from him, with all the hype around him and with all the weapons that he came into, right? He was kind of like that driver that was coming into like a Ferrari with, he had Keenan Allen there, he had DJ Moore, he had Odunze coming in as a rookie. Now you add on top of that Loveland, who I think all three of us really like. You've got Komet, who's still there. So, whether you think he's the tight end 1 or the tight end 2, you've got a couple solid tight ends. How are you approaching this? Swift is still there, obviously, and Roshan Johnson, for me, a really nice value. Which pieces do you like out in Chicago for 2025, Abib?
Kind of another situation where I'm pretty much grabbing them all. Colson Loveland is probably at the top of the list. If I'm looking at my ownership percentage, have been just grabbing him throughout the offseason. That's been one of the guys who's just sort of kind of been a constant click for me. Love the upside there, and kind of like you talk about with like thinking about the game in quarters. Probably a guy I'm not going to help there the first couple of weeks, but it's a guy that I can just see really taking over towards the back end of the season. I don't see this as a playoff team, so this is a team that I'm really intrigued about. When it comes to some of the younger talent and offenses, or the offense itself trying to get a better look at it. At some of these younger guys. So I still, you're getting a real massive discount on Luther Burden right now. I wasn't high on him pre-draft, but I can't ignore the draft capital, can't ignore the landing spot, and everything that we keep hearing about the offense itself is, they really want to attack that kind of short and intermediate part of the field where Caleb seems to thrive a little bit more as opposed to down the field. So DJ Moore, I've been finding myself maybe, clicking a little bit more just in the what if it's DJ Moore, and he's a primary, slot option in this offense. That is something that I don't want to completely miss out on. So you can definitely be in drafts and find him slip towards the back end of the early fifth round. And there's just when I'm kind of willing to take that value. And then Odunze, he's kind of like a lot of these other guys that we talk about. I mean, that rounds 4 through 7 wide receivers. I mean, there's going to be some guys that are going to lose you your leagues potentially, and there's going to be some guys that are going to really make you a lot of money and really trying to make sure you get the right combination, or maybe are a little bit overweight on the guys that really break out in that range is going to be kind of tough. But it's just a big unknown, like who's going to be, in what type of role. To me, is definitely very much going to be based off of what does the person calling the plays, what does a person, who's putting, the person that's putting together the offensive game plan, what do they want to do? I don't think this is a situation where it's what does Caleb favor or who is Caleb's favorite wide receiver. Ben Johnson is going to dictate who the first read is. He's going to dictate where the ball is going to go, and then you'll have obviously plays where, there's checkdowns to DeAndre Swift. So it's a tough offense. I want pieces, but I'm in no way trying to go out of my way to get a bunch of Bears on my team. I think we were all really excited about this offense initially, but you can tell based on ADPs, based on the market, based on just, kind of the comments that are coming out of camp. I think everybody's just sort of kind of somewhat hesitant and not really ready to just go all in. So if you want to stack this team, I mean, now's the time because it's a pretty easy stack to get away with.
Dan, before we get into rapid fire for tonight, to finish off our NFC segment, anything to add with the Bears and how you're approaching them?
No, I'm kind of with Abib. I mean, they're an offense that I'm terrified to not have enough of, and they're an offense I'm terrified to have too much of. So I don't know. I mean, can Ben Johnson fix Caleb? That's the big question. Because a whole lot of what was going on last year was, not just the offensive line, but, Caleb Johnson just kind of losing his head back there, and he was creating a lot of sacks himself. He was not, looking good even when he was unpressured. He still didn't look like a great quarterback a lot of the time, so I'm not sure if he's got what it takes. We see these, quarterbacks that even go, number 1 overall in the draft. There's no guarantee that they're going to succeed. So I have my questions about Caleb, and that kind of colors the way that I'm approaching the rest of the offense. But I do like the price on Burden. I do like the price on Loveland. DeAndre Swift, I was in on him for a while, and I've kind of gotten to the point where I'm like, I've never seen DeAndre Swift take an opportunity he couldn't piss down his leg. So I don't know where to go with that, but I guess that's kind of led me into a little bit more Roshan and a little bit more Menangi. But I mean, it's just kind of like I just can't feel really good about any of these guys other than Burden and Loveland, just based on price and the fact that hey, Ben Johnson took him. I think he's going to want to use him.
All right, let's do some quick rapid fire. I'll go to you first, Abib. The Packers, which receiver do you prefer in that offense when you're drafting these days? None. Okay, that answers the other question I had. So Dan, I'll go to you. Which one do you like?
I like the same one as Abib.
Yeah, Tucker Kraft sounds like Tucker Kraft.
Yeah, and
it worked last year.
Oh yeah,
Kraft is starting to shoot up draft boards to the point where he's getting uncomfortable for me to draft.
He's already there.
Yeah, he's tight end 11 now.
So let's go Detroit. Do you think they continue to steam forward, Abib, without Ben Johnson over there as the OC? And who's your favorite target in that offense?
Line is good enough. I think they are all maybe a little bit either overpriced or right at value. I am starting to buy a little bit more into the Jamison Williams hype. And I was definitely someone who was like, I don't see the targets there. A little bit of regression with Ben Johnson leaving, tougher schedule. But that is one where the hype is coming from players, coaches, beat writers. I don't want to read too much in the Amon-Ra, offseason knee cleanup procedure, but new OC, and I'm just kind of hearing that they're using him in different ways. That kind of like that, key phrase I like to hear. They're moving him around. They're using him kind of, different parts of the field. He's seemed to be no longer just a deep threat. And this guy was taken very high in the draft just a couple of years ago. So could be just one of those guys that like really just sort of kind of breaks out. I think we forget that Amon-Ra, as good as he's been, was not drafted as high. So where does this offense want to go? I still think that Amon-Ra probably beats him out PPR wise, but to me, the only thing that really needs to change is that the OC's, thinking to himself, I would prefer to get Jamo the ball and scheme him open a lot more than I would Laporta. And Laporta will still get his, but Jamo is the de facto definite number 2 receiving option and one that has some serious yak potential.
Yeah, Evan Silva recently, I heard talking about a source that he has in Detroit, talking about how that offense is going to run through Gibbs and Jamo in Detroit. Dan, anything to add with someone you're targeting in that Detroit offense, or how you feel they're going to move forward this year?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the key is what happens with Jamo, because if Jamo does what everybody is expecting of him, I think that's going to be bad things for Laporta drafters, and it's might mean that ARSB is not quite I don't think he'd be like a huge disappointment, but he might not he might be more of a high-end wide receiver 2 than a medium wide receiver 1 or something like that. So I typically haven't drafted a lot of ARSB anyways, just taking that slot guy that early in the, like you've had to for the past couple of years, just not a thing I really like to do in my drafts. So I've been kind of shying away from him. But yeah, Gibbs is somebody that when I get the opportunity to take him, I'll definitely take him. I think he's a fun player. Jamo's a fun player at his price. Those are kind of the 2 that I'm going in on. And I'll tell you what, Goff has a place on some of my teams too, just because of the fact that hey, if it's a home game, he's probably going to be playing pretty well. He can be part of a platoon. I wouldn't want to count on him full time, but I can make use of a guy like that.
Dan's been watching a lot of quarterback on Netflix, so he's getting all hyped about Jared Goff. Yeah, so I know we talked about a few teams in the NFC, but is there a team right now, Abib, that we haven't discussed that you think is maybe undervalued?
Or the
NFC. The NFC.
Oh,
maybe give me an undervalued and maybe an overvalued if you have.
Yeah, I would say the Saints are undervalued. I just think, I'm like, I keep going back to it. Like, who's the head coach? Who's the offensive coordinator? What has their history been? And that's kind of like, that gets more points than really anything else. And then I just sort of kind of work backwards from there. So, love the pace that Kellen Moore has worked at the last few years. It's definitely an offense that I've been buying in. And Kamara, even last year, with as bad as he looked, was still points per game, kind of like a top 5, top 7 option. So get a nice discount there. And I seem to have been the only Olave believer up until recently. Now his value, his ADP starting to rise. So he's like my second highest owned player. But so like that's definitely an offense. If they just at least just sort of kind of, are decent, and obviously a lot of that I think will be dependent on Tyler Shuck, who I'm betting to kind of be the quarterback there. I think that's an offense that could really break out. And then the other question was who's overvalued?
If there's anyone that's overvalued NFC wise.
It's a tough one.
We can come back to it. I'm with you on the Saints.
Yeah, let's maybe come back. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm with you with the Saints. I've been saying the Saints and the Colts for me are two offenses that I think can click. Obviously, with the quarterback position, it's kind of making it cloudy for people, but that's where I like the value that you're getting. And the Saints just have weapons, man. Like Shaheed's back. You've got Olave. You've got Kamara. If Shook can come in and be a solid starter for them, he's coming in as an older QB. We've seen some of that with success in the NFL. Dan, who's one for you right now? Undervalued offenses in the NFC.
Yeah, give me Carolina. I think that's a very undervalued offense. We saw Bryce Young make real progress last year. And he was so broken the first year they actually had to bench him for a while in year two. But then, Canales put him back out there and kind of, he rebuilt him basically. And the way Young was looking was great. He looks a lot more confident in what he's doing. I mean, they almost beat the Chiefs last year, which was, borderline crazy. And now they're getting some more pass catchers. I really love Ted McMillan. I think he's a fantastic pick at his value where he's going in drafts right now. It's an absolute slam for me. And then, you've got a good running game, and you've still got a terrible defense here. So, they're probably going to have to score points to stay in games. So I like this offense a lot. Canales has shown that, he's a good offensive coordinator, a good coach. So that's somebody that I want to be tied with, as Abib's been saying the entire show. Offensive coordinator really, really matters. And, when you got a head coach like Canales, that's somebody I want to get in on.
Do you think Sanders takes a step forward, Dan, in that Carolina offense at tight end?
I mean, it's possible. He's going cheap enough that I've speculated on him some. He's not like a huge target for me, but he's certainly not in the void either.
Okay. Beeb, have you thought of a overvalued? I mean, we could go right to the last questions. No biggie. If you've got one, throw it out there. But if you have a favorite NFC sleeper at any position that we haven't talked about, someone you've been clicking often, I know you don't want to tell all your secrets, but for those that have stuck with us throughout the whole show, let's give them a little nugget.
Yeah. As far as some kind of overvalued team, I'm kind of looking at the board. I don't really see one that's overvalued. I mean, I think maybe the Cardinals, but I just think they're more at value than anything else. So I think that might be the offense just between Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. I don't think both can hit ADP. Not a strong believer in Kyler and elevating multiple receiving options, at least to that degree. So that would probably be the offense that I think I would choose or go with.
Okay. Yeah. Sleeper, you got a sleeper for us?
I think I kind of already gave. My main sleeper would be Chris Olave.
Okay.
We're going a little bit deeper down the board. Colston Loveland has been sort of kind of definitely my guy. If we're just looking at just the NFC, and then I'm going to go way down the board here because I'm sure there's somebody else down here. I'm looking at the board actively right now. That might be it for now.
For Loveland, just for those, because I know Dan and I are big fans. How quickly do you think he becomes a factor in this offense?
Few games, like 2 to 3 games. I think maybe we see his snap count and snap share maybe kind of rise from game 1 to game 4. But I could also see him just coming right out of the gate. The fact that he was able to start training camp and is already starting to kind of get work with the ones. I think it's going to be, you don't draft a guy that high and then really kind of delay his progression and his ascension in the offense. He's just drafted too high. They seem very excited about it. And when I watch his tape, I mean, one reason why I'm so excited about it is just because of what I saw pre-draft. I think he's just, I think he's, to me, he's easily my tight end one. So I'm expecting big things from him. Yeah.
Dan, I'm not going to let you snipe me. I'm going to stay in the same offense. I'm going to go Roshan Johnson. Just, you talked about Swift. I kind of like clicking both, to be honest, not in the same team, but I kind of like having a bit of both. I like having, running backs and a good offense. You hope that Chicago offense ascends. Who's a sleeper for you right now, NFC wise, Dan, whether it's deep or mid rounds or even early?
Yeah, we already talked about him, but the Eggman, Egbuka, he's just going way too cheap right now. So he's been an easy click for me. And I'm kind of liking the discount on Jordan Addison as well. He's going down at wide receiver 40, which I think is pretty cheap for a guy who's basically getting double-digit touchdowns every year. So, I know he's gonna miss a couple 3 games, but I'm looking actively to get either Hawkinson or Addison on teams, not both on the same team necessarily, but one or the other. I think either of them can pay off pretty well.
I got one more.
All right, let's hear it.
I want to make sure you guys leave you guys with something. DeCorey Krosky Merritt. JCM. Let's just call him JCM.
Yes.
JCM.
Every time I think about his name, I'm always like going through.
Do you know Dale's laughing out loud?
Corey
right now,
Krosky Merritt. Yeah.
There you go.
Every time I try to say his name, I always screw it up. But yeah, JCM. I mean, that's definitely a guy, a situation where you don't have an elite running back in front of him. You got Austin Eckler who's aging, and he kind of has this very torturous, odd kind of collegiate career where you kind of ask yourself, like, why did this guy get drafted so late? Is his 7th round pick even worth my time? But then you kind of turn on the tape and you're like, and then you go through his history and his transfer and suspension, and now you can kind of, put pieces together. But he just looks different. He just looks different. And I feel like that's either a situation where he can either outright win that job over the course of the season, or, a guy gets hurt and he's not looking back. So definitely a guy like I target in a lot of drafts.
That's perfect, because we didn't touch on Washington tonight. Obviously, we could keep going all night with you, and we appreciate your time. Guys, if you're not already, make sure you're checking out First and 15 on the YouTube machine or on your favorite podcast machine. It's a must listen every time they come out with an episode, whether they're talking about a specific position, doing a live draft. No matter how it comes out, there's always a lot of nuggets in there with Abib, Deo, and Chris over there at the First and 15 fam. Remind the peeps if where they can find you, Abib. Anything else you have coming out with the First and 15 fam, or anything else you have coming out, let them know any of that goodness before we walk out of this one.
So you can find me on Twitter at Skywalker, SKYWALKA 2000 at yahoo.com.
Oh man, I just realized I forgot a 0. I just realized I had it at Skywalker 200. That's horrible.
That's all right. 2000.
That's an early version.
Yeah, and definitely check out the pod. We try to definitely talk a lot of game theory, go over drafts. Dale does a good job of kind of coming up with topics and trying to have the pods really age well from a standpoint of you can start. If you're just kind of getting into draft season, you can go back to our drafts day one. And what we love is that everything is on wax, everything is on tape. So things that I was sort of kind of talking about, or Dale was talking about, or Chris was mentioning, in May and in April, you can check the timestamps and you can say, okay, these guys were, mentioning this player, and now this player is getting all the hype. So we love that aspect, and vice versa. We want to be fully transparent, but our mascot or our motto is #stay ready. And for us, that's really, what we try to do is try to stay ahead of the game. The industry, the market, players are just, so much more difficult to go up against. Everyone's so much more knowledgeable. So any little edge that we can get, we want to give. And last, I'll leave you with this. We do have a special guest. You guys may be familiar with him, but that will, we'll maybe display that in about a day or so coming up this week. And yeah, we got to get you guys on, and we got to get the First and 15th B-Goat district in a draft again. That was awesome.
That'd be great. That would be great.
Yes,
that would be great.
Yeah. All about that action.
We gotta for sure. I'll reach out to Chris. I know he's the back end guy. I'll reach out to Chris again.
Absolutely.
That would be definitely fun.
Absolutely.
But guys, Check him out, First and 15 at Skywalker 2000. See your name tag. I was playing around with the graphics before the show, and yours disappeared right before you guys came on, and I was panic putting it in, and I just forgot the 0, man. So I apologize. But make sure you check him out, First and 15 at Skywalker 2000. And we appreciate your time, man. We appreciate you spending all this time with us. Dan, I know you're out there in the player profiler streets. I know you're back from a bit of traveling, vacay, taking care of the girls. What do you have coming up for the peeps?
Yeah, I got, of course, we got Goat District again tomorrow night. We got Shopes on, and I'm really looking forward to that. We're going to have the first episode of the Fantasy Empire going this week.
Nice.
Looks like probably Wednesday during the day. Me and Chris and Nelson and Matt are getting back together and gonna enjoy that one. Bradley and I we didn't do a Stack Hunters this week, and then I'm out on a canoe trip next week, and then the week after that be right back to podcasting. More Goat District, more Stack Hunters, more Fantasy Empire. So I'll be everywhere, man. You won't be able to escape me. I apologize about that in advance.
He's the overhyped sleeper and no E on the end, and he's been on more canoe trips this summer than you've been in your entire life. I guarantee it. Guys, smash that like button, smash the subscribe. Make sure you tune back in tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Eastern, with Mike Shope, the voice of the Buffalo Bills. We're going deep in the AFC, and I appreciate the chat as usual. We appreciate you, and we'll check you all later.
Goat District, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offers the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden, they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man. Y'all know what to do. It's the and I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.